a candle can be poured in layers and still become solid. So having a candle built in frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
Do you want me to document while you talk?
That'd be great.
I feel like that would be
Yeah, I think for me there's definitely, well, because candles for me are about memory and about encapsulating different moments and recalling different moments. That once, instead of like, if you have just an object there, a solid object, then it becomes an extension and just a elongated thing that isn't necessarily a moment or like an experience in itself. But I think the layering of this allows for different moments to occur and different revealing of memory as it changes and appears constantly to our mind. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And loss is part of that? Is loss part of that?
Yes. Loss in general, memory. The way memory works, basically, it functions on you record something, and then you can do one of two things. One, reiterate and try to re-record that thing as many times as you can to have it solidified, or you can leave it alone and the memory actually still is, it's technically stronger or more accurate to the experience the very first time that you have. So every time you remember something, you end up actually just remembering the last time you remembered it, rather than the first time you experienced it.
I think this piece is really sad and really like about destruction, or it's almost like we're waiting for this this structure to be destroyed. Like there's a house fire, or it's like it's not like a birthday cake. It's like a eerie,
Yeah, I see it as ominous. Like if I am looking for something to bring into my domestic space, the imagery of another domestic space being destroyed by fire isn't necessarily the one that comforts me. And it makes me wonder, like, did you experience a house fire? Or I think it's also like an interesting decision to have, maybe this is just because I'm in ceramics a lot this year, but like to have like a platform for it with no lip. Like I'm thinking about like a plate, like when you make a plate, unless it's for something that's not going to spill over the sides, which is very few things, you make like a raised edge around the edge of it so that it doesn't go everywhere, whereas like the wax, at this point, if it like drips too much, can drip over, or like if one of the walls caves in, it's not contained by this platform, which is like another thing I'm thinking about. If like I'm bringing it into my domestic space, how is it being self-contained? Or if it's not being self-contained, how am I cleaning it up afterwards?
Can you talk about that?
I guess this iteration isn't necessarily the one you would bring home. This is my personal iteration. I don't think I have a very clear answer to your statement yet.
Would you show, like if you're going to show this in a show, would you show part of it only burned, or maybe a video of it burning, or have it like this where people would come in and sit next to it? Like, would you save this as an artifact after, with like part of it burned?
If I was in a show, I think I would just have more layers, and then simply as the show went on, it would reveal the next layer and the next layer.
Because I really like the potential for candle art and what you're doing. Like I can see it continuing and you making candles of your surroundings. I think you just really going very far. And for me, I'm having a very calm experience, which is interesting. And I think it's part of, I recognize that it's a house, but I also see it as just a candle. And I'm like comforted in just looking at the flame and kind of realizing that it's, I don't know. I think that's part of like the sinister nature of it being a house, is that I'm calm but I'm removed and just looking at it. Like I think it's more complicated than it just being, you know, just a burning candle for me.
I mean, I kind of hope that it would be, really interesting.
I think it almost all depends on where you're showing it. Like, if you were to put this in a white wall gallery, I would call it avant-garde. If you were to put it outside, I'd equate it to almost sort of like the claymation stuff that I see these days that are done, it's done outdoors and filmed outdoors. And or also the women and men that I know that have worked with doll houses before and recreating crime scenes. I think it's the one that's coming to mind. These like scale models. Like, and then because it's a candle, you can do that. You really can. Like I feel like if you had a name in tow that could show in Chelsea, like I would put it there and just sort of like call it art, right? Because if you put it outside and install it, it's also this whole other story to it. It's certainly not domestic to me. I caught my bedroom on fire when I was a little kid. And I'm like looking at these blankets and I'm like, holy shit, these are so flammable, these are gonna melt us. Like, so there's this alarming sense of it, but it has an inner light coming from it. It's also like toy size. It's also like plastic toy, like stripped down look to it. So I have no idea what's going on here, I really don't. But it's different and I like that.
I think the toy aspect of it comes from my personal references and like my personal memory of playing with candle. I would actually play with them as toys when I was younger. So that's definitely like right there. That's why the construction is kind of made the way it is. The size.
Completely like finished, tidied end result, tied with a bow where everything is like nailed down and more about, oh boy, I hope we don't start a big fire. It was really about deviating from the norm. So with that said, I have two things. One is that I'm interested in sort of the narrative that the burning can convey. And if this is being built of like nesting scaffolds, almost like if you could think of a Marushka doll, but instead, you know what those are? Like,
No,
what?
I don't. I'm sorry.
They're like, they look like little peanuts, but usually they're painted faces. And there's a little baby,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Well, so like just instead of having like these pods that sort of the little pod nest into the medium pod, nest into the bigger pod, these are little scaffold that fits into the bigger scaffold, right? The armature of the candling, right? You're building these candles not as solids, you're building them as surfaces, right? I wonder about how you can push the narrative, like almost the way we would read a book, right? Like, so now, like, what gets revealed? What is it? You know, are we gonna see a bedroom? Do we see an apple? Do we see like something from Alexander Calder Circus? And so wanting to see the next chapters of the story while we're also watching something getting destroyed is a pretty unusual place to be in, because usually we just sort of blindly watch the next chapter come forward. So I'm interested in that, because I know you and I have talked a little bit more privately about these things being built in tiers.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure if that's happening with this one, but I am following the lines that you have for your wicks.
Mhm.
So I understand there's a travel down. So that I'm interested in, how you're designing narrative within the build, knowing that in order for the narrative to unfold, it also has to be destroyed. But then I also think, and this is about like where you're positioning it, that if you want it to be in a domestic space, then how do you collect the loss? Or if you do want it to be like, I think you need to take a position with it. I think you can have it like speak about a domestic space and put that in the gallery space. But I feel like how it's imploding or exploding is as much as a narrative as the meltdown.
Yeah.
Like I guess I'm not convinced about this presentation, and I think that for you, it's more than just sort of getting it on a pedestal.
Yeah, and
It could be in a tub of water. Like,
I know.
there's so many different ways. I think Bonnie's right.
I mean, I agree that this isn't the way I'd want it shown. Well, this is and it isn't. I'm totally vibing how it's set up, and I feel